this guy's up to. Well, looks like there's a rudder project underway here. For starters, Gungeon's bolts are off. Oh, let's go up top here and see what's going on. Hello. Hey, welcome aboard. Come on in. Have a seat. I'll tell you what's been going on. Well, you noticed we got a diesel heater going here now. It's come in really handy since winter's turned, well, it's turned into winter, I should say. We've had a couple of days now down the single digits here in Colorado and up to 20 inches of snow so far. Anyway, a good start to winter. Actually, it's still fall. But anyway, we'll get into a DIY in the next video on installing the SIG 100 diesel heater. And as you may have noticed coming up here to the boat, there's a rudder that's that needs work, and I'm taking that apart, and that'll be another DIY, along with working on an icebox over here, conversion to refrigerator. That's all coming up in these winter months. In the meantime, let's stay warm next to the heater, and we'll look at part 2 of our trip into Bayfield and the Apostle Islands, reaching out to Stockton, Madeline Island. I hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time. Let me tell you about the second part of this visit into the Apostle, starting off in Bayfield. And then we'll move on to Stockton Island and Madeline Island for some hikes. Last time we began exploring Lake Superior, a lake so deep and vast, 10% of the fresh water of the earth is here. It's the world's largest lake by area. It's the size of South Carolina. And there's enough water here to cover the North and South American continents in a foot of water. Lake Superior is the highest of the lakes, sometimes referred as the Upper Lake. And that's where the French origin of the name Superior comes from. It has a relatively small watershed catchment for its size, not a lot of inflow from the small rivers that feed it, as you see here on the map. And so given its vast volume, larger by far than all the lakes combined of the Great Lakes system, the average residence time of this water is 191 years. And that's a great reason to keep this water clean. It sits here for a long time. Now, last time we arrived at the city dock in Bayfield, a little town of 500 or so. It's a great place to meet up with our older son and his girlfriend who are driving up from Milwaukee tonight. Tomorrow we'll head up to Stockton Island. Bayfield is a fantastic stop for cruisers to stock up on supplies, get repairs done, even a haul out is available, and do what a lot of others do, tour the town and its shops. Everything you need is within walking distance. I needed to get batten replacements for those I had lost on our first windy day. My mainsail is a 43-year-old original. Batten pockets are worn, so this time I'll sew these battens in. I stopped by Tim's sail-off to pick up these battens. Then I headed over for my hardware needs to the chandlery across the street, and then over to the True Value hardware store. Elsewhere in town, there are several good restaurants, several art and bookstores, small hotels and Airbnbs, 2 fresh fish markets. There's a grocery store, a bank or 2, small churches, and a beautiful brownstone town library. The stone was quarried from the local area, and several of the Apostle Islands themselves have quarries. The library was built with a Carnegie endowment, as was the Brownstone Library just south and nearby Washburn. Walking in here, you're immediately reminded of the significance of Bayfield in the maritime scene. Bayfield's importance continues on in present day as an active sailboat race center, tourboat, sailboat charter center, and it's a home port for the ferry service over to Madeline Island. At the ferry terminal here and scattered elsewhere, I appreciate seeing signage that encourages awareness of the local indigenous language. If you come to Bayfield, don't miss this Maritime Museum. has an emphasis on local maritime topics spanning from the time Native Americans arrived to current day. This birch bark canoe, made here by local Ojibwa craftsmen, sometimes Ojibwa are called Chippewa. Elsewhere you find other fine old sail and motorcraft that have prized these waters. There are exhibits on the construction and maintenance of them. You'll learn of the very active period of logging here and around the Apostles. There were huge rafts of logs were towed across the lake, sometimes as far away as Canada, to salt mills down in Ashland, just south of us here. There's the mining of brownstone used in buildings here and all the way down to Milwaukee. Then there are the interesting methods of fishing in open water and under the ice. Then there are the documented struggles in the fisheries with the invasive sea lamprey and survival in harsh winter storms. Not to say summer months are that easy going. Here's a passage written by Lieutenant Bayfield, 1832. He says that you'd rather sleep in below zero weather under blankets than endure a night sleeping in campfire smoke to avoid swarms of mosquitoes. Lighthouses are beautiful and so important in the early days of shipping, but we're reminded of the sacrifice and loneliness endured by those who kept the light on. And there's much more to see there. But now it was time for dinner, so we headed up the street to Andy's IGA market. This time of year they have fresh, locally grown green beans and blueberries. And old country fresh bread from the local bakery in Ashland. But be prepared, the bread sells fast. On the way back to the boat, we picked up same day's catch of whitefish at Hoop's Fish Market. And then we headed back to Soteria to cook. Wow, it's been a good while since we had fish that good. But the day's not over. There's music just 100 yards away at Waterside now playing. Right up there where the dock meets Rittenhouse Avenue, Main Street. Performers play under a gazebo 2 to 3 times a week during the summer. Well, after midnight, our son and his girlfriend arrived and slept up in the V-berth while we slept in the settee area with the table down. After a short sleep and a check on weather, we made plans to head up to Stockton Island. With a light northeast wind and Stockton Island being directly upwind, we had plenty of tacking practice, as you see here. Late morning, light rain didn't help, but it did add some diversity to our mostly cloudy day. By late afternoon, we arrived near the dock at Stockton Island, but as is often the case for summer, the dock's full. So I had to check with Mary Dahl's book Superior Way for best anchorages nearby. And there's lots of sand out west of the dock, so good places to anchor. And after anchoring, we inflated our old Sea Eagle raft up on the foredeck where we had some room for removing the staysail stay. And then we used the main halyard to lower the boat into the water. The boat rose well, and I took a couple of passengers. It was a bit awkward getting through under the solar panel, but okay, this way works good. I'll build a solar arch this summer, so this won't be an issue again. But I had to leave one behind. We can only take 3 in this raft. It was near sundown on a cloudy day, so it got dark fast. So we made a quick visit to the visitor center with the park folks, and then a short hike out to the beach on the east side of Presque Island. That's the lower end of Stockton Island. And we took in some creative beach art along the way. And we headed back to Soteria for dinner. The next morning, the wind was calm, so my wife and I headed back to Stockton Island. This is a very popular destination, especially on weekends, as you can see here with all these boats anchored. We stopped by the visitor center again and got a better understanding of what this unique and very diverse island is all about. We took the Anderson Loop Trail around Presque Isle. This point of land was once an island when the lake level was higher and before sand filled in, but it's now joined the sandy piece of land called the Tombeau. Actually, the origin of the name Presque Isle comes from the French name meaning almost island. Much more info here on changing climate and a heads up about bears. One of the highest concentration of black bears in the U.S., with about 20 on this island of 2 miles by 8 miles long. So off we go through this lush northern hardwood forest, lots of birch, maple, cedar, pine, ferns, and moss-covered rocks. We eventually reach the south coast of an exposed sandstone rock formation with nearby islands out there in the distance in view. Wave action from late yesterday's winds slap ashore. Further along, we reach the east side of Presque Isle. And then there's a beach further up along the Tombeau, or lowland connecting Presque Isle to the larger portion of Stockton Island. In heading back to the visitor center, we transition from the beach to this filled-in lagoon, which is more like a savanna now. When we were here 40 years ago, this was mostly water. This island is probably the most diverse in terms of vegetation. This map shows a wide range of ecosystems on this 2 mile by 8 mile long island. Everything from black spruce forest to red pine, northern hardwood and hemlock, bogs and fens, coastal grassland ecosystems, and wet meadows containing carnivorous plants. Unlike their Hollywood cohorts, these carnivorous plants don't sing and they only eat bugs. Now it's time for us to get back in the raft and head back to the boat. And along the way, we find these campers moving their equipment the fun and easy way. Time now to raise the anchor. And using the northeast wind, we laid a beeline course straight to Bayfield to get our passengers back in time for the long drive back to Milwaukee. It was pretty much a wing-on-wing trip all the way back. That night, we looked over Dahl's guide, Superior Way, the plan for the next few days. Following that, we'd need to leave the boat for about 3 weeks while we headed back home, and then on to memorial services for a cousin in Ohio and one in California. So early the next morning, a little after sunrise, we headed out of Bayfield. We tacked into a light southeast wind, and then over to Madeline Island, which is by far the largest, but also the only inhabited Apostle Island. We tied up at a temporary slip at Madeline Island Marina. And then headed into town, passing some interesting stuff along the way. This island is served with year-round ferry service to Bayfield. Our time was short there, but we did stop by the History Museum briefly. But then it was back to the boat, and day was getting late, and we wanted to get on to Big Bay State Park on the east side of the island to anchor for the night. As you see here, we had a bit of tacking, between Bayfield and La Pointe on Madeline Island, and then pretty much a straight sail straight over to Big Bay with its big sandy anchorage and protection from all but east winds. With light southeast winds, we passed one of the few nav aids you'll see in the Apostle Islands. And as you see too, the water temperature is still pretty warm here in mid-August. We continued on northeast bound in a light air reach. There was heavy haze from smoke and humidity, which turned the sun a red, dark red, well ahead of sunset, and we anchored in late dusk. Next morning was warm and bright with light winds, and we decided to have breakfast out in the cockpit, enjoying some scrambled eggs and bacon with heavy German wheat bread, toasted with butter on the frying pan. Last night I put up this anchor sail to reduce the swing that you might expect at anchor, since this boat has a lot of windage on the bow, so it does a bit of sailing at the anchor. But winds were too light last night to see if that would be an effective deterrent to that swinging. Well, the beach over there looked inviting, but our old Sea Eagle raft has sprung more leaks now in the seam of the transom. So we took in the view and decided to move on, not bothering with the raft. So here we are, rounding Madeline Island on the east side. And then we head west to Red Cliff Casino and Marina. Winds were very light by the time we passed by Basswood Island, and it was late in the day. The moon, now a crescent, was just dangling over the horizon. And as winds turned lighter and more westerly, we had a motor the rest of the way, about an hour's worth of time, doing about 4 to 5 knots over to Red Cliff. Well, after dark, we checked into a slip at the casino's marina, and the next morning I found something missing. And when I was lowering the mainsail late yesterday, I played out the halyard on the deck, and when the sail came down, a loop circled around the Charlie Noble, pulling off the rain cap on the diesel stove chimney next to the mast. And by the time I saw what was happening, the little cap clanged on the deck a couple times to say goodbye. I'm going for a swim. That was the last I saw of it. We spent the day at the casino and visited the various sailors at the marina and elsewhere in the area. And we found a lot of activity, including this tour by kayak. The next day we had a north wind at about 15 knots, which made it a short trip from Red Cliff down to Bayfield. Wind at our backs the whole way. The next day we cleaned up the boat and prepped for our 3 weeks away. Since our truck was still down at Washburn, we needed to catch Bart. Yeah, same sounding name, but this is in San Francisco. Bart here links towns on the east shore all the way down to Ashland. Once we met up with our truck, it's now a 6-hour-long drive down to Milwaukee and the beginning of a lot of jet travel. Join us next time for the conclusion of our Apostle Islands sail, when we'll head out to 4 more islands, seeing the best scenery yet, and encountering some wildlife we were surprised to see here, and managed to accommodate 6 people on this little boat. All of that before a complicated haul out and a troubled drive home. That'll be the last of our 3-part series on the Apostle Island sailing trip. I hope you'll join us for that. Till then, we'll see you next time.